Give me a testimony, and I really can't give a testimony without sharing the journey, part of the journey where it all came from, how I got where I am. First of all, I grew up in northwest Iowa, Sioux County to be exact, and of those of you who've lived in Sioux County, you know exactly how I grew up. Everybody, and at least the people that I knew, all grew up the same way, and we were expected to live up to kind of an unspoken standard. Everybody had to be the same. I found it very confining at the time, but I was the oldest of 5 kids. I was born to parents who also were both the oldest in their families. Wouldn't recommend that because they had were given strong responsibilities when they were young kids and passed that on down to me, and high expectations. And somehow I was just supposed to know everything and be able to do everything and know everything and not ask too many questions. Because if I did ask a question, it was like, well, don't you know that by now? You should know better than that. So from a young age, I kind of felt like I was on my own. I had to figure things out by myself. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very Christian home. I mean, we were just saturated with it. We went to a Christian Reformed church twice every Sunday. You had to be practically about dead not to go to church. We were sent to a Christian school. We went to Sunday school and catechism. We did have living on a farm. We had 3 meals a day. Some of you are nodding your heads. You grew up that way too. Growing up on a farm, we had 3 square meals a day, and before every meal we prayed, and after every meal we prayed and read the Bible. And I cannot say that's a bad thing. I mean, I think we've lost that. I feel bad losing that with my family because I think it really did keep us together, and we're a close family yet today, I think, because of those times around the table. So I did appreciate that. Another thing we did is memorized a lot of scripture at a young age. And that also turned out to be a very good thing for me because those verses ended up being there for me when I needed them later. I was confused at church, though, about grace and how that worked with the commandments. I mean, we were taught grace growing up. We were taught that you're saved by Jesus Christ. It's not about what you did. But we were also taught the 10 Commandments every Sunday. You had to have the 10 Commandments every Sunday. And it was like I left church every week thinking, I got to do better this week. I got to do better this week. And we were also taught it was arrogant to say, yes, I am going to heaven. Because you only got to heaven by the grace of God, So I just felt like if I just kept doing better, then maybe I could make it into heaven someday. By the time I got to high school, I was exhausted being a good girl. I was just so sick of it. Like, I can't. So I found the parties, and I just wanted to drink, I didn't have to feel anything then. Wanted to just hide out and check out for a while. I wouldn't recommend that. It just makes you stupid. So I did meet my future husband in high school. He also was the oldest child in his family and had unbelievable responsibilities at a young age, and we connected over that, became really good friends. We did what everybody did at that time. We married practically out of high school, barely 20 years old, and had both of our boys by the time we were 25, and lived on the family farm with his parents. And my dad ended up working for us, and we were living their lives. I mean, we were pretty much doing exactly the way we were grown up and did everything right, and we're pretty miserable. It's like both of us knew we weren't doing what we were meant to be doing, but we had no idea what we were doing everything right, what was wrong. So we still tried to make our lives look like everyone else's. By 1990, we were both worn out trying to live something in a way that just wasn't us, and tired of trying to please our parents all the time. We didn't have our own lives. And we left the family farm, which, oh goodness, it's a bad, painful experience, but I was so hopeful that by moving to an acreage by Brandon, we could get away from all of that. There we go. We could get away from all of that and finally live our lives and be our family and do things the way we wanted to do them. What I didn't figure on is we had no idea how to do that. Didn't have a clue because we didn't know any different. And things happened on that place that we ended up struggling through some very difficult, very painful times, and our lives were just getting out of control. And in '96, it blew up, and a friend of mine was there. She saw it. And I was headed pretty much for a nervous breakdown at that time because I kept trying to handle everything all by myself. It was up to me, to make it all right, make it all better. The only thing that helped me when I was going through that insomnia and panic attacks at that time was to recite Psalm 23 over and over again. Again, the memory verses that I was a kid came back, and I memorized them all, of course, in the King James Version. So that's how I had to recite it in my head, kind of a modified version. It was the Lord, for those of you not familiar with Psalm 23, it's the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. And sometimes that's all I could get to at night was, He restoreth my soul. By that time, we were bankrupt in every way. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially. We ended up selling everything. His business, my business, our acreage by Brandon. And we moved into this cute little rental house in Sioux Falls. And again, I was so hopeful. I thought, okay, now we can get our family together. And we could just simplify our lives, make it simple, and we'll get our act together. We did everything right. We went to counseling for a number of years. We went to church. We got involved. And things just kept getting worse. And it just made no sense to me. It's like, why? Why isn't this working? Everything that we knew that was supposed to work wasn't working. So the year 2000, the new millennium, became a turning point for us. I started a job at that time that I'm still currently in, good, solid, stable job. By that time, our oldest son had moved to Michigan. In May, our youngest son graduated from high school. And by that September, he moved out with a bunch of buddies in an apartment. And due to a bunch of circumstances, I could tell I was heading for another nervous breakdown, trying to do it all by myself. Finally, on Sunday morning, I knew I had to leave my husband that day because I thought, I'm not going to make it. And I went to a friend of mine, and I just couldn't believe I did that. It's like people that, the way I grew up, you just don't do that. And that friend was so good to me. She was perfect. And looking back, you just see how God took care of you. That following Monday, I found a great little one-bedroom apartment, but I couldn't move in until November 1. So that night was really the first great turning point in my life when it comes to my faith. Many Christians, when they become a Christian, they can give you a day in their life that said, okay, that's the day I became a Christian. Well, I was always a Christian. I grew up a Christian. I always talked to God. I always knew He was with me, even through everything. I knew He was there. He made it very clear to me that He was there. My problem was I kept trying to do everything by myself. It was up to me. And that night, I finally gave my life to Him. And I told Him that whatever is left of this person is yours. You just do with it what you want. I don't care. I made such a mess of things. I have no idea what I'm doing. It's all up to you now. And he's going, oh, finally, you're letting me drive. I'm sure he was just waiting. It's like, yeah, it's yours. You're done. Looking back, I can see how He takes care of us in spite of ourselves. It's amazing how He can get things done even though we keep trying to get in the way. Okay, so that was October. December, then my car blew up. It's 49th and Marion Road, 5 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. I'm waiting for the light, and boosh, this black smoke comes pouring out of my car. It's going like... And I don't know a lot about cars, but that's not good. It's not good. So I crippled this thing back to my apartment going, now what? I have no money. What am I going to do? I'm by myself. And due to another whole story, by the end of that year, I'm ending up with this new little Saturn car, brand new. It's nothing fancy. There's no electric anything on it, but It was mine. It was the first car I ever bought by myself. I'm still driving it today. I mention that story, number one, because it's kind of symbolic. It's like, oh, yeah, why not? But because of a dream that I ended up in January, that became just a really powerful part of my journey. January 2001, it started to hit me what I had done, and I'm panicking. You know, what do I do next? How is this all affecting our sons and our families? I left my church. I was so involved in that church. I was in 3 committees, and I just walked away. What were people thinking? How can I support myself? How do I get out of debt, much less even think about retirement, which didn't seem all that far away anymore. So I just went on. And you know how your mind goes. You're going 100 miles an hour when you're in that place. You can't even see straight. That night, I'm dreaming that I'm driving my little car, my new little car, on this straight road. And I know I'm dreaming. I'm going, oh, I'm having a straight road dream. Not one of those where you're driving. Does anybody have those dreams where you're just driving all over and you have no control? I don't know. I had tons of those, right? I had no control driving, and I just would wake up exhausted. But this time I was on a straight little road, and I'm driving. I'm like, oh, this is nice. I got a little car. And I'm not paying any attention, and I drive off a cliff. And I'm falling, and I was always taught that if you fall in your dreams, you're going to wake up before you hit the ground, because otherwise you die. Anybody else hear that? So I'm falling, thinking, please, please, please save me, pull me out of this. At least save my new little car. You know, I just got this car. Save me. You know, I don't want to hit the ground and not ready to die. Just save me. And suddenly, like dreams are, you go in slow motion, and the tires grab the ground, and I pull out of it. And I stop, and I'm going, they're wrong. I hit the ground, and I'm not dead. It's like, oh, this is pretty good. Just I get out of my car, and I look around, and I find I'm in a field that's being harvested. And I landed in a harvested part. And I hear the chopper running in the background. Again, farm kid. And the field is sorghum. And I had never seen sorghum before I married my husband. And this stuff is tall. You know, it is thick and green and just dense. And in my dream, the sorghum was taller than sorghum even is. I mean, it was just poof. And I could not see anything around me. And before I could even think about how I'm going to fix this situation, this young kid comes out of the field, and he comes up to me and he says, do you need some help? And I go, yeah, I fell off that cliff up there, and I landed here. I need to get to I-90. I-90, I don't know, but I needed to get to I-90. I have no idea where it is or how to get there. And he goes, well, if you look out in the east, way in the distance, you'll see I-90. Sure enough, little semis, you know, driving along. I could see way in the distance. I thought, okay, I see where I need to be. See where I need to end up, where I need to go, but I have no idea how to get there. And he turned around and looked at me with these eyes that were just filled with compassion and shook his head, and he goes, you don't need to know. He said, I know the way, just follow me. And I was like, wow. And I woke up, and I had such peace that I had never, ever known before. The fear and the panic that I was feeling was just gone. I knew I didn't have to be afraid of that. And the first memory verse that came to me after that was Proverbs 13:5, and it was, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. I needed to trust something that made no sense to me. But if you just go to him and you pray to him and you scream at him and you cry to him, he will show you the way. Good is going to be ahead of you, even though you can't see it at the time. About that same time, I started coming to Hope Church. And it was such a breath of fresh air for me. No one knew me here. I could just go to church wearing jeans and sit with a cup of coffee and just be. I didn't have to be anything. I could just relax and drink in the music and the dramas and Mike's words. And what he was saying was, God in me, God with me, good ahead of me, and guaranteed. Now, I'd always known the first part. I always knew that God was in me. I always knew God was with me. Good ahead of me, gosh, if I look back, I could see all the ways that good was ahead of me. And I couldn't see it, but it was there. And I thought, it seemed like a possibility, no matter, I had no idea what was next. But good was going to be ahead of me. But what about guaranteed? Could I actually say with confidence that no matter what happened down here, no matter how messy life got, how many times I screwed things up, if I just believed and turned to God and trusted in Him that good was ahead of me, that I would go to heaven in the end, and that was guaranteed. So it's taken me a few years to learn about the true nature of God, His promises to me. I'm finding that He is really now starting to show me the person that He created me to be, not what everybody else expected. I still find myself freaking out about things. I mean, things are going to happen in life that make no sense. And you're allowed to freak out. You really are. You wouldn't be human if you didn't freak out. But it's what you do about that. Now I allow myself to be human and allow myself to start asking for help, which I still find very hard to do. But what does help me to remember are the verses that I learned back when I was a kid and continue to learn today. I'm really trying to learn those verses. A tip, use those verses or combinations of them as your password. You know, we need 1 million passwords everywhere. So use a Bible verse as a password, and every time you type it in, say that verse. That's helped me to memorize some of them. So the verses and that one dream. Now, I-90 is not heaven. And believe it or not, Iowa isn't either. But I can say with confidence that after all the blow-ups I've been through, that if you do trust in the Lord with all your heart, and you don't lean on your own understanding, because things are not going to make sense. If in all your ways you look to Him for help, for answers, to faith, your family, your friends, He guarantees that good will be ahead of you. So, thank you.
Good morning. Here's a little flyer in your worship folder. Starting next week, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to do a core beliefs course. There are 4 things that are at the center of healthy spirituality. It's belief that the bar behind you, heaven is in front of you, God's Spirit inside you, and a lost world around you. We'll take one of those beliefs per week from 9 o'clock till 10 o'clock, right before the service Sunday morning, and want to let you know about this. We'd like to know, we're going to be able to provide childcare, and we'd like to know how many children we have, so it gives you some instructions about writing name, phone number, and kids that will need childcare. So if that sounds of interest to you, be a great course, good opportunity to be able to learn some things, discuss them as well. We can't discuss things on a Sunday morning, but in that context, we'll be able to have a discussion with one another. But this morning, we are talking about the 10 commitments. We're in the 6th of a 10-week series, and we're also in the 7th day of a 40-day experiment. We are attempting, and you could join us on this experiment this week if you choose. We're attempting to focus on God's commitments to us for 40 days. Why? Moses was up on the mountain looking at God for 40 days, and that transformed him. We can't go to Mount Sinai, we can't make a trip to Israel, but God's glory is reflected in what He says. Glory is opinion or valuation. God communicates commitments to us, and those function as the focus of His glory. It's like what God thinks about you. We're looking at that for 40 days and wondering what kind of impact that will have. It changed Moses. My sense is that it will have an impact on us as well. Let's talk about, though, why does this help? Focusing on commitments, God's commitments to us. What about our commitments to Him? What about things we're supposed to do for Him? There are commandments in the Bible. As we've been saying, to the degree we believe His commitments, we can keep His commandments. Look at that specifically. Why focus on commitments? We're in the danger of being negatively influenced by harmful desires. What the Bible says, people who want to get rich, and this is just one of them, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. It's an interesting image here. Talks about the love of money is the root of all evil, not money, the love of it. But if living in America, it is a temptation that all of us deal with, just flat out. It might not be in sub-Saharan Africa, but for us it is. And so let's just face it. It gives the indication that those who dive for money, whose intent, whose plan, whose intention is to get rich, that you end up diving for money and you end up being submerged by it. And it talks about many harmful desires, speaks of death and destruction. And I guess the image that it creates is somebody intending to dive and get money, and they are submerged by things there, and they never get the chance to resurface. That's the image. Why focus on commitments? God's commitments positively influence all who trust in them. There are desires that negatively influence, but God's commitments positively influence. Look what it says. It's speaking of the Israelites, says, "For we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did. The message they heard was of no value to them, because those who heard did not combine it with faith. Now, we who have believed enter that rest." And what it indicates is that when God gives commitments to us, and we believe them, we trust in them, we rely on them, that they allow us to enter God's rest. They have a positive impact. Now, these commitments, these promises, don't benefit us if we don't believe them. God can say things to us, and those things don't have automatic benefit. But if we look at them, make room for them, increase our capacity to trust them, then they begin to have a positive influence. We find ourselves entering God's rest. And that's why we're looking at the commitments, increasing our capacity to be aware of God's commitments so that what we know we can believe. And as we believe, we can enter God's rest. And God's commitments to us have influence as we believe them. And as it relates to, let's just take money for instance, believing God's commitments helps us resist harmful desires. It says in the Bible, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And I think here's how it works. So the way to not be pulled by the gravitational pull of the love of money, and again, we're all going to deal with that. It's not to focus on not loving money. That's not going to work. What we're given here is that there's a positive focus. It says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. To the degree we believe that commitment, it will help us be protected from being pulled by the gravitational pull of the love of money. Do you understand how that works? And you might say, how is this practical? It's intensely practical. To the degree we believe and trust in His commitments, it protects us and enables us to resist the influence of harmful desires. The love of money is just one of them. There's all kinds of love, all kinds of desires that will have an impact on us. And what I find here, if we want to move in the direction of being more who He wants us to be, we need to be aware of His commitments to us and believe them. And we will find that in so doing, it will help us to have the power and the strength to be the people He wants us to be. So that's why. Believe the commitments enables us to keep the commandments. We're looking at good ahead of me. Good is ahead of me. It says, I will make an everlasting covenant with them. I will never stop doing good to them. A covenant clarifies God's commitments. God takes covenants and commitments seriously. That's what a covenant is. It's a contract or an agreement. God keeps His covenants and the commitments that go along with them. And here, what He says, God will never stop doing good. That means that good is ahead of us. We might see it this way. If we, being connected to God, are connected to good. And you say, well, that's a nice thing. Will that automatically benefit me? And what's the answer to that? No. If you believe it, it will. Here's what He says. If you're connected to Him, being connected to Him, you're connected to good. A connection with Him that can't be broken, a connection with good that can't be broken. Is good ahead of you? You say, I don't know, I'm looking around at my life. Don't look at your life. Are you connected to good? Boy, I don't know. Don't look at your checkbook. Are you connected to good? Well, gee whiz, I'm looking at my job. Don't look at your job. Don't glance at these things. Don't gaze at them. Here's what He says. What does this verse say? I will make an everlasting covenant with them. I will. What does it say? What's the word? Never stop doing good. Never stop doing good. That means good is ahead of you. Our challenge is, that's tough to believe, but that's what He says. And as we believe it, that it makes an impact on us. The source of good. God's intentions are the source of good. Look what it says in the sheet in worship folder. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Every good and perfect thing is from above. If it's good, it originated in God. That's what it says. If it's good, that which is good in our lives finds its origin in Him, because every good and perfect gift comes from Him. He is the Father of the heavenly lights. There's no shifting shadows with Him. James tells them that God is the source of good because it's not immediately obvious to them that He is. The people that James is writing to are encountering difficult things. As they look around, it doesn't appear that God is good. What he tells them is what God says so that they can put their confidence in it. Believe what God says. God's intentions are the source of good. God's influence is the source of good as well. What it says, speaking of the Israelites, He led you through the vast and dreadful desert, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you water out of hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the desert, something your fathers had never known, to humble and to test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. God led them through the wilderness. That was not a pleasant experience. It's not that they stepped outside. They didn't do what God wanted them to do, but God did lead them, and He led them through difficult places. You'll remember that they crossed the Red Sea, and that was a great experience. They walked through on dry land, but then God led them into the wilderness where they experienced some things that weren't fun things to experience. In fact, relative to God's influence, He led them through hard means. You know, you talk about there's a means to an end. There were hard means that led to good ends. Look at the last sentence in that verse. He gave you manna to eat in the desert, something your fathers had never known, to humble you and to test you, so that in the end it might go well with you. God led them through hard means to good ends. And again, we could ask the question then, when we go through difficulty, is it automatic that that difficulty will have the impact that God intended? Let's remember the verse, what it says about them as God led them. God's commitments positively influence all who trust them. For we also have had the gospel preached to us just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because those who heard did not combine it with faith. Now we who have believed enter God's rest. For all of us, there's things in our life that are difficult, that are hard. We can have the tendency to believe that we've been abandoned, that not good is ahead of us. And when we believe that not good is ahead of us, we try to protect ourselves with other things. Here's what God says to you. I will never stop doing good to you. I will never stop doing good to you. I will never stop doing good to you. Never stop doing good to you. The challenge is looking around at our life and believing what we see or believing what He says. I think that's the challenge of Christianity. God makes commitments to us, and it's more natural to focus on the circumstances and conduct rather than focus on what His commitments to us are. What? Let's talk about the signs of good briefly. The signs of good, and the reason why I say that, we've talked about this before. How do you define good? What's good? You know, if I talk to you, you'd have different definitions of good. Some of you who are Vikings fan, good might be a switching quarterbacks, or not. Depending on what you value. What's good to Barack Obama? Good to John McCain? What's good to a coach of an athletic team? Depending on what the intention is, good means different things to different people. What does good mean to God? When God defines good, how does He define it? When we talk about good, usually it involves getting what we want and keeping what we have. What's good? Getting what I want. Keeping what I have. That's good. Does God feel the same way? When it says all things work together for good, does it mean good as we define it? All things work together so God makes it so that I get what I want and keep what I have. Does God define good the way we do? And I think the answer is no. Good is ahead of us, but we have to think about how God defines good. But it says in your worship folder, Christ-like character is one of the signs of good. It says our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our, here's the word, God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in His holiness. Now, I think there's a definition there. Do you get it? God disciplines us for our good. What's the next words? How does God define good? There's a definition there. Good means sharing in His holiness. When God defines good then, He says good is something that brings us to a place where we're able to more closely reflect what He is like. And then it goes on to talk about what kind of things create the context in which we become like Him. And look what it says. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained in it. So, here's the question. Good according to God. What does it mean? Short-term pain results in long-term gain. Short-term pain is about things we go through that feel long, but it's, from God's perspective, not long. We go through difficult things because difficult things forge character. It's what it says, that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. I have a question. Discipline and punishment. We've talked about that before. Are those the same things? You know, it talks about discipline. Discipline, depending on how we experienced discipline, has really shaky connotations. I think there's a difference. Discipline versus punishment. There's different focus and different motives. Let's talk about punishment. The focus of punishment is on past wrong behavior. When somebody is punishing you, they're thinking about what you did wrong. And their focus is on that wrong thing. The focus of discipline is far different. It's not on past wrong behavior, but future right behavior. That's the focus of discipline. It's child rearing. It's coming alongside a child, creating a context where that child will do the right thing. And that's the focus of discipline as it relates to God. The motive for punishment and discipline are different as well. The motive for punishment is justice or wrath, retribution, evening the scale, balancing the scale, thinking about what you did and then, but the motive for discipline is different. It's love. It's wanting an individual to get to a place where they are strengthened. And what it says then is that God allows us to be disciplined, to encounter difficult things, but it's not because you did something wrong and He's going to remove that from your life. The image here, those who have been trained by it, it's the word gymnazo, the ones who have been gymnastic or gymmed by it. And it's speaking of exercise. You know, we've talked about this before. Go into an exercise room, and it looks like people are getting tortured. You know, and then they're running. And I just went to the gym yesterday, and after this workout, so I'm sitting in this chair, and I just am absolutely spent. And this one guy comes over and pats me on the shoulder. I think he thought I was about 2 steps out of the grave. And I looked like, whoa, what? But he understood. And the reason why we do that is because, well, I don't know why I do that. No, when you go to a gym, you don't just go to a gym to remove things. You go to a gym to build things. You don't go to a gym just to remove bad things. You build muscle. You build stamina. You build strength. God involves us in difficult things, not because He says, I saw what you did, and I'm going to send my goons to create a context where I'm going to beat that thing out of you. Do you understand? That's not the picture. It's not what you're doing wrong. It's what He wants you to do right. He thinks about the love that will come. When there's endurance, the way you'll be able to reflect Him, that's God's motive and focus relative to discipline. The signs of good are Christ-like character and Christ-like impact. Look what it says about Joseph. You remember the story. He had dreams, knew that he had a destiny, and he talked about it a little bit too freely to his brothers. They became jealous. He had this nice coat. So they felt jealous of him, and they acted on their jealousy by throwing him into a pit. The oldest, some of us, the oldest, Wanda-like people, felt responsible and said, we can't kill him. They fished him out of the hole and sold him to the Ishmaelites, Midianites. So they sold him, and you know the story. He ends up going from there, and he ends up going into prison, and he ends up in Egypt, in prison, where he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. And what ends up happening, his brothers come, and they have some interesting discussions. He has some interesting things. What happens? The dust clears. They understand it's Joseph. They understand that he is second in command in Egypt. They remember what they've done. And now Dad's dead. And they're thinking, we're toast. We threw this guy in a pit. Fratricide. That's not a good thing. And then Joseph, we pick up the narrative. Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Okay, there's the word. Good. In fact, you could circle it. And it's going to describe what good is. Okay? You intended it for good. Do you remember what good meant in Hebrews? Good was sharing in His holiness. So good is Christ-like character. And here good means something else. Let's see what it says. Good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So here's what Joseph did. He looked at his brothers and he didn't say, you did a good thing to me. What he did say is that your bad could not trump God's good. God's good trumped your bad. You intended to harm me. But God overshadowed your purposes with His. And guess whose purposes went out? His purposes. What Joseph was doing is this. He looked around at people eating because of how God used him in Egypt and said, good, 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 good. You intended bad, but God intended good, what's now being done. Bad things happen to us. God's good purposes, I'm going to say this, God's good purposes trump anyone's bad purposes that's involved with you. We haven't been thrown in a pit by brothers and sisters. Some of us have been mistreated harshly, and even now. Can you believe that God's good is ahead of you? Joseph came to a place where he was able to see it. God's good trumps everybody's bad. God's good purposes win out in the end. Good is ahead of you. And what God would have us do is believe it. Good is ahead of you. You are moored to good harbor. You are anchored to good. Good won't look like you think. It might not be. In fact, for many, it won't be a bunch of money. Some, there will be money, but not for many, perhaps. Not as much as we want. It's not that good. What good means? God will make you more like Jesus. And you'll have His impact. What is good according to God? Short-term pain results in long-term gain. The suffering of one results in the salvation of many. I'll ask the worship team to come up. We're going to close with a song. We say this in terms of what Christ-like impact looks like. I've said this before. When the suffering of one results in the welfare of many, God calls that good. That's why we call that Friday what? Good Friday. The suffering of one results in the welfare of many. God allows us to go through things in order to accomplish good, Christ-like character, and Christ-like impact. We go through difficult things, and it's not always about what God's doing to us. It's about what He wants to do through us. Good is ahead of us. And as we'll see next week, that's guaranteed.
Stand up as we sing this last song.